All right, well, welcome everybody back to America's Mom. We have a very special edition today. While everybody was partying it up yesterday on St. Patrick's Day, I was thinking once again, how many more families are going to be traumatized by the federal government? To my knowledge, I had never heard of the federal government, the FBI, having a quota on how many people they had to arrest. In fact, we're told from the local police department all the way up to the state police that they don't have quotas. That's just not a thing. It's not really something they actually do. But time and time again, we see that the government is making sure that demands are met for what? For the way that they are creating legislation, for the way they are passing laws to justify the Patriot Act and different things like that. They have quotas in place. They needed domestic terrorists to fulfill a ticket that kept allowing them to grant FISA warrants that you don't know anything about. It's interesting. I'm reading a book right now, actually, called The Secrets of the FBI. I figure I should learn about these people. And in there, they talk incessantly about how many secret warrants have been distributed, times when you didn't even know people came into your house, went through your stuff, took your belongings, planted bugs in your home, did all kind of things that, according to the Fourth Amendment, they're not allowed to do. And if you're following my Twitter right now, you might have seen I posted today. I homeschool, my husband and I homeschool our kids, and we're having them memorize the Bill of Rights right now. And we were going through the Fourth Amendment. It's so timely for this conversation we're going to be having today. There's nothing they're doing that is constitutional. Nothing. And the Constitution is written to protect us from them, from the government, from a government that actually thinks they can come into your home where your persons are not safe, your stuff is not safe, your papers are not safe, your home is not safe, without you ever even knowing about it. That is not constitutional. How this has all happened and deteriorated to the point where we are seeing pregnant women incarcerated just for being at the People's House on January 6th. We've reached a whole new level of despicable in these three-letter agencies, and yet they're not willing to acknowledge it. They're going to keep arresting people. In fact, I'm aware of several arrests. We're going to talk about that this hour also. This is a really important conversation, and I just want to encourage everybody to be hitting the share button right now, getting this out there everywhere. I want to make sure that everyone is hearing this conversation. It's uncomfortable. It feels impossible to be happening in the United States of America. And it's not even close to over. Not even close. Just the other day, I had a person who had been in my life for a very, very long time, who happened to be at January 6th also. People are stalking him on his social media and creating a YouTube channel devoted to the FBI capturing him. He's never even been spoken to about his appearance at January 6th. There are some very disgusting people in this world who believe that government is more important and sits above you. In fact, you may have missed it, but yesterday there was a very important ruling on big tech and government. And the Supreme Court, including Amy Coney Barrett, who we're just going to call a liberal justice now. Forget the days of thinking she was a conservative. I'm glad she fought for babies, and that is wildly important. And that's not all there is. There's a constitution to defend. And essentially, if you all can go to KrisAnne Hall's site, any of one of her platforms, any one of her social media platforms, you're going to get a rundown on the ruling from yesterday. And it's dangerous. It's wildly and completely outrageous and dangerous. And it feeds right into the conversation we're going to be having today. Essentially, the justices in their first narrative are stating that the government has special rights. They have more rights than you and I. They actually get to shut down conversation they don't like. They get to determine what is appropriate speech and what's not, according to the writings yesterday from the Supreme Court of the United States of America. I'm just confused because I've read the First Amendment and it says that we have free speech, period. And you cannot suppress it, government. And yet here we are. On that day, on January 6th of 2020, I think it was millions of people. I think that the media has tried to play it down, make it look like it wasn't that many, maybe a million people, but I think there was far more than that who ascended on the People's House, rightfully so, to express their grievances and to support a president that they believed his election had been stolen. It's not so crazy now that we're looking at all of the lawfare that's been done to those who have dared to speak out and say that the machines are rigged, who've dared to say there's been ballot harvesting in opposition to what the community even looks like. Let's say you're in a Republican community, but all these Democrat ballots flood in, or vice versa. It's happened vice versa also in primary elections. And the more that people are talking about election fraud and election interference, it doesn't seem so crazy anymore that people on January 6th who attended the White House, came to the People's House, believed that an election had been stolen. President Trump is still very loudly and proudly declaring that his election was stolen. And let's just face it, guys, all over the world, everybody knows the election was stolen, from Afghanistan to Romania. They know that the election was stolen. And the gaslighting that's continued to go on has been so that they could declare American citizens as, back to our beginning, domestic terrorists. They need to meet a quota. My first guest today is an incredible woman who saw what was happening that day, had a personal experience with a loved one being attacked and becoming a victim of this January 6th hunt. You talk about a bloodbath. The only bloodbath has been the one on our rights in America. They've been completely and utterly destroyed and gutted over the last 3 years. She's had personal experience with the government coming down heavy-handedly, outright, pursuing people who didn't break any laws, who didn't violate any laws, and making them criminals to meet this particular quota. But more than that, Cynthia Hughes has decided that her mission in life is to help care for the aftermath. Yeah, that's right. There's a fallout to all of this. There's a fallout to what the government is doing to all of us. It's called the families. It's called the wives and the mothers and the children left behind as fathers are taken and put into isolation for years without even a trial, or sentenced to unreasonable terms and reasonable prison sentences in high maximum security prisons when they have never even had a criminal record. Cynthia Hughes has founded a project called Patriot Freedom Project, and it is designed to support and partner with these incredible families that are going through the real life experience of government attacking and abusing their people. Cynthia, thank you so much for being with us on America's Mom, and thank you for allowing me to have this conversation with you in such a public way. I know it's not traditionally your path, but I really appreciate you letting us put this out there publicly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on and getting the word out, because this is a problem. Nobody is talking about the aftermath. Nobody is talking about the fallout to this. And that is a big issue for me. I've watched it with my own family, and I'm watching it with a ton of other families, and I'm watching children really suffer. And for me, that is the collateral damage in this, And Sharona, there's a lot of people that have, I would say, misconceptions, right? As you know, we're going to have another guest on here. There's women facing jail time. There's women that have to go through a grueling trial and have to be ripped away from their children. We saw Rachel Powell get sentenced to a ridiculous amount of time, and she just started her sentence in January. If the Supreme Court does not overturn the 1512, that egregious obstruction of an official proceeding charge, Rachel will be kept away from her children for the next 4 years. And there's other women like that.
I want to stop for just a second, kind of pedal back for just a minute. The majority of the charges that we're talking about, I kind of want to save that for our next guest, because I know he's intricately in the details of all of that. I really want to focus on what you have done and how you have been working so hard to pick up the pieces, the incredible aftermath of the government coming in and pulling these people out, sometimes under the cover of darkness, the abuses that happen to them. Talk to us a little bit about what happens to the families who they've been deemed domestic terrorists, and how does that impact their lives? We're talking about people who are out on the front steps of the Capitol, not criminals, not destroying property, not abusing anyone, which was the majority of people who were there, unless if they were apparently there's going to be some things that we talk about a little bit later about who was doing that stuff. But the majority of these people that have actually been sentenced did not do those things. So what's the actual fallout look like? Walk through it with us.
So, that's very true. There's a lot of people that have been, overcharged, charged with crimes that they actually did not commit, over sentenced, and, people with, no criminal history. There's people that are being charged for simply touching a Trump sign. There's people that are being charged because they stood next to Ray Epps. I mean, the list is long, and your next guest will, touch on a lot more of that. But for my role, when I would get calls from my nephew, and he would tell me, different things that were going on in the jail for, husbands and fathers, there would be times when I wouldn't hear from him, and I would say, like, where you been? You haven't called me. I'm worried. And he said, I don't have children, and I don't have a wife. These men need to talk to their wives. They need to talk to their children. It might have been Mother's Day, Father's Day. And Tim and I would talk a lot about the fallout. And we just came up with the idea that There needed to be a community, a support place. We never envisioned it was going to turn into what it has. And thank God it has turned into what it has, because there are a lot of families that are just in absolute peril. There's a ton of children that, have had to change schools. They've had to move out of the only home that they've ever known. There are women that had to give birth to their first child while their husband was in jail. There are people that have lost their mother and their father. Their parents have passed away. There's a lot of tragedy that is not being spoken about. And so
Mm.
I created a little community where we could come together. We meet over Zoom every single week. We've made a documentary about what the real fallout here is. And I think it's the families, and I think it's the children. Don't get me wrong. I mean, my nephew was robbed of 3 years of his life that he's never going to get back. I mean, 3 years of his freedom gone, like nothing, like it didn't even
Mhm.
exist. How
That's
do
right.
we fix that? We don't fix that. And he's a strong, strong dude. Let me tell you, Sharona, very strong in his mind. But even the strongest person has to figure out how to pick up the pieces and press forward. And nobody wants to discuss that. And you know what? Today I learned, I read an article, it might have been the Washington Post. Now they're going to attack President Trump because they have nothing else. Now they're going to start attacking President Trump because he's talking about pardons. These people need a pardon. These people that maybe can't be pardoned need their sentence, commuted. All of
Well,
these cases have to
speaking of
be
him,
looked
hang on.
at.
We have a little. We have something we want to share about
Well, I
President
just
Trump.
want to start by saying that I'm a big fan of Cynthia Hughes and Paul Ingracia, and you're doing the Freedom Project, and I love what you're doing. I have such respect for so many of those people that are really held hostage by our government, what they've done to the people that we know and that we respect and that we love. It's just a terrible thing. It's an injustice. There's never been anything like it, in my opinion, in the history of our country. And we're going to have to do something about it, and we will do something. So, Paul and Cynthia and everybody, and I say hostages because that's what you're hostages. What happened here is an injustice, and it should never be allowed to happen again. So, we have a big election coming up, and I hope everything works out well with the election. And if it does, you have a real friend. Thank you very much. Have a great time. You're going to have a great life. I'm telling you, you're going to have a great life. Things are going to happen. It's going to turn around and things are going to happen for you. This was a great injustice and it's got to be turned around. Thank you very much.
I tell you, hearing a message like that from the president of the United States is incredible, and he supports you fully in the work that you've done. And so I just want to stress right now, while people are jumping in and tuning in, that was President Trump endorsing Cynthia Hughes and this incredible Freedom Project that you've been a part of. Why do I have such a hard time saying the name of this?
Just call
It's
it
starting to drive me
PFP.
crazy. I've said it like a million times. PF.
P.
Say it again. PFP. Yeah.
PFP.
Yes. Okay. Patriot Freedom Project. That's right. Patriot Freedom Project. And we're going to be pulling up the website in just a few minutes. But President Trump fully endorses you. You're actually the only J6 association that he does endorse and that he has supported publicly because of the work you've done with the families. And that's really what I want to dive in with you. When you talk about people having to be moved from their homes, we have this thing called guilt of association, where people who are attached in any way to J6 have become villains. They've been vilified and they're being kicked out of their homes. Not to mention, as you said, you've got the fathers who've been put in jail. Now, where is that money going to come from? How are these kids being taken care of? And let's talk about a generation of boys, thousands of boys across the country whose their dad or mom is no longer in the home. We already know what that does. Tell us a little bit about the people that you they're fine with us sharing their story on here, and what the work looks like that you guys have been able to do.
Well, before I dive into that, Sharona, I want to touch on something with President Trump. I'm so sick and tired of the attacks on this man. He is such an authentic, just incredible, heartfelt, man, who happened to be the president of the United States. He's got a heart in him. His generosity is off the charts. He's just so thoughtful. He cares about these people. He cares about these children. We've had multiple fundraisers where he has attended. He has met with several of these children. He embraces them. He hugs them. He reassures them. He tells them how proud of them he is. He reminds them how strong they are. He tells them, you have to behave till your dad gets home. He's so amazing, 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 amazing. And people should, stop these unnecessary and disgusting and despicable attacks on this man. You don't want to like him, fine, then don't support him. But anybody that says that he does not get behind what's happening with J6 doesn't know what they're talking about. And I will say this, he is not responsible if somebody committed an act of violence that day. If somebody broke something, if somebody assaulted somebody, that is not on his back. And we need to start talking about that a lot more. I'm a grown woman. Nobody tells me what to do. Sharona, you're a grown woman. Nobody tells you what to do. And we should not be holding President Trump hostage like that. So I just wanted to say that we love President Trump. So the families, Sharona, I have a little cold, so please forgive me if I lose my voice here a little bit. Some of the families, they are lost their health insurance, for example. We've helped a couple of families that have lost their health insurance, and we paid COBRA because, like a certain family that we helped with, their child had a medical condition, and they needed to stay on their insurance. If they had lost their insurance midway, this child wouldn't have been able to continue the treatments that they needed for this medical condition. Who was thinking about that? Who still is thinking about that? Nobody. And we decided that that's what we had to think about. And I had a little bit of a troubled, time in my life. I was in a bad marriage, and, I had to think of my children, and do whatever I had to do for my children. And thank God I had good support behind me. Some of these women don't have that. And so we put this together so we could support them, so we could help them, so they had a place to lean on. We had two families that just went this past weekend to visit their loved one. One family had to drive almost 13 hours one way. And sometimes she has made that drive and she has gotten there and the visit was shut down. No questions asked, no explanation. Too bad you drove 13 hours and you spent money on a hotel. Another family was going for their first time for their visit. They had an almost 9-hour drive one way. Fortunately for them, they had a good weekend, both of them. They were able to see their loved one, but the list is long and I could keep going and going and going because there are so many stories like that. We had a woman that first came to us when we first started Patriot Freedom Project. Literally, she was donating her plasma to get extra money. I mean, nobody talks about this, so we talk about it. And we're doing something about it, Sharona. And so we created the Patriot Freedom Project. We have a great docuseries out. Part 1 is out. You can go to dueprocessdenied.org and you can see part 1. You were just showing Sharon Caldwell. It's despicable what they've done to that family on the other site, on the due process site. And Sharon's husband hasn't even been sentenced yet. He went to trial 2 years ago. They didn't even go inside. This is an incredible family that went to the Capitol, to mark a day in history. They didn't do anything wrong, but because of things that he said that other people didn't like, he should go to jail. He's in his, he's up there in age. I'm not sure how old Tom is, but it's not okay. And we've that's Sharon right there, and we've supported this family. And we're helping with legal fees. We've helped a ton of these defendants with their legal fees. We're paying rent, we're paying mortgage, we're paying utility bills. We help at Christmas time. We help with back to school. We have great support from people like Dinesh and Debbie D'Souza. They've made a very significant contribution to us. And they knew that we were going to do the right thing. And that's why they trusted us. There's our book, published by Post Hill Press. The book touches on a couple different families and what they've gone through. There's a lot of talk about the Pollock family. Controversy, and I will be honest, there is some controversy, but what that family went through the day they were raided, I mean, they had flashbangs thrown through the windows of their house where their curtains were catching on fire, where their walls were catching on fire. This is the stuff that needs to be out here, and President Trump is the only one that's really talking about it. You didn't hear anybody else that was running for the presidency talking about it. We know how Joe Biden feels. He's determined for these people to be in jail for their entire life, the rest of their lives. It is not okay. And now today, the Washington Post to come out and say, and even they quoted a senator who said these people should not be getting pardons. Why not? Why shouldn't they? I could
You
keep
know,
going and going
the
and
iron,
going.
Cynthia, the irony of this whole situation is that right now we're literally, you could walk into this country, get a $10,000, debit, welfare card, get your phone, get your housing, get everything for committing an actual illegal act, which is
Yes.
illegally crossing into America and taking up residency here and just crossing our border illegally. And yet they are incentivizing it there. It's so backwards and upside down. It's so hypocritical, just on its face. Okay.
Yeah.
That's even before we get into the details of each individual, by the way. Every individual is supposed to be judged individually, not as a blanket clause and a guilt by
Not these people.
association, especially, when we've heard about all of these FBI informants now that this is just incredible. Now that Speaker Johnson is finally releasing the unredacted and no blurred out video footage of what we know are FBI informants and even agents among the crowd inciting violence, stirring up the people, talking into their little, who talks into their hoodies. I don't know who does that. And inciting people to do things that they normally would not do. And even many times people are heard saying, I'm not doing that. No, no, no. And calling out feds publicly directly during that time. So it's ironic to me. It's not just ironic, it's just absolutely disgusting. It's such an obvious political agenda, this attack and this laser focus on removing the most patriotic people in our country who will come and physically take a stand. And I think that's what this administration is the most afraid of, is that if they can get rid of the quote 3%, get them out of here, then the rest of us will be subdued. We'll go in our corners. We'll hide away because we don't want that to be us, right? We don't want to be looking at a prison sentence because we said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing or spoke out against our government or showed up on government property, which actually means it belongs to we the people. I mean, that's literally what they're doing. Don't you think, when you look at the abuses to these families, because we're not talking about these families to incite more fear. The purpose for you coming on here is to say a citizen stepped up, saw a need, did not wait for the government to form a fund, did it herself, lobbied and rallied the other great patriots across this country to fund things like new shoes for quickly growing boys because their dads are not there for extra supplementary, for it to pay the bills, number one, and certainly not for supplementary income that pays for those extra things. A citizen, Cynthia Hughes, came along and said, this is what I'm going to do. This is my mission. I'm going to answer God's call, and I'm going to start helping to take care of these families. And I'm looking to, the right and the left of me to see who's going to join me in this effort. That's what you've done. You've not let the government put you in a state of fear. Instead, you've stepped up and you're helping to take care of these families. And what I want to do right now, everybody who's watching, we're live on every platform right now. I want you to do something. I don't want you to leave the conversation because it's just getting hot. I don't want anybody to leave, but what I want you to be doing right now, I'm going to share my screen again. This is critically important because no one else is doing this. These people will be all but forgotten. And I know that firsthand. I had Michael Eckert on, and he is a man out of Kansas. Okay. And yes, he literally typically fits the bill of what you think a Kansas man would be. Okay. He's just a good old boy raising his family, God, guns, country, and working for a great company, just living his all-American life. He went to the Capitol that day. He committed no crimes whatsoever. He just spent the last 11 months in prison in the high maximum security prison. You know what kind of people are in there? We're going to talk more about that with our next guest, but nobody came to his aid except for us. And who am I? I'm nobody.
I feel that way. I feel that way, Sharona. And I'll tell you, when Tim got released, I was very angry that he had to go to a halfway house. He had a family to come home to. He had support to come home to. Why were they going to put this kid through, another thing, another ordeal, right? For us, it was short, thank God. But here's the deal. There are many more people that are going to come out that are not going to come out to a family and to come out to support. And they're going to live a long time, in a halfway house with more rules and more people, breathing down their neck and watching them. There's so much fallout and so much collateral damage to January 6th that doesn't even get talked about or touched on. And I don't know what we would do without people like you, Sharona. Thank God for people like you that let us come on and discuss these things. Thank you.
It is the most critical conversation we need to be having right now because they want us all locked down in fear that we could be next. And we just can't succumb to that. And that's why it's extremely important to be sharing these stories. It's going to be hard to hear. And I want everybody to continue as you're jumping in. I know people are just getting off work. I want everybody jumping in, hitting the share button to your stories, remember, because that helps to support and increase your algorithm. Don't share it directly to your page. Share these things to your stories and share them through email and messenger and all of that kind of stuff too. But I want everybody to start making their way. Save it in your phone. It's patriotfreedomproject.com. Go to the donate button. You've got a couple different ways to send a big fat check to P.O. Box 729, Allenwood, New Jersey, 08720, or you can donate online right now. I want everybody to be monthly contributors. I don't want you just to give one time and then walk away and be like, I did my job. Are you serious? These people are in jail and prison for the next 4 years. And in some capacity, we need to share that burden with them because they did what we all should have done. That on January 6th, the Capitol should have been flooded with 180 million people. All of those, okay, we'll say 80 million. The 80 million that voted for Trump, the more than 80 million, actually, I think that voted for Trump, should have been there that day, should have been standing and saying, this isn't right. We want an investigation. There was nothing illegal about asking for that. And there certainly was nothing illegal about being there at the People's House to support President Trump that day. And just to be there, like you said, for such a historic time. I know a lot of people who went just to pray at the Capitol. They just wanted to be there praying for unity and reunification of our country because it was so divisive. That whole election had been. So many great reasons people had for being there. And then they were villainized and their lives have been destroyed. I think of Rebecca Lavrenz, the grandmother out of Denver, Colorado, who prayed on the steps of the Capitol. And now she's looking at a 7-year prison sentence. I mean, this is insanity. This is insanity. They're lumping everyone together. I want you to talk a little bit more about that, the 1512 thing. Just make that make sense to us. What is that? And how has that affected the outcome of all of these cases? Just for people who I don't think as many people know as we think they do. So like fifth grade, like you're telling me for the first time, please.
Well, I want to reserve that for your next guest because nobody knows it better than him. He was charged with it. You're talking about a man with no criminal history. You're talking about a man who was entirely peaceful, walked in, walked out, and you had a Trump-appointed judge say, I don't care. I don't like you. I don't like the things that you've said. I don't like the pictures you've taken. I don't like the books you read. I don't like that you went in the building. And you're staying in prison. And he'll talk more about that. But Sharona, they're still arresting people. It's not stopping. You connected us with somebody last week. We were able to put him in touch with an attorney. Then we got a call from a gentleman in Illinois. He's a single father. He's got a 14-year-old daughter. We need to help him with his legal fees. We connected him with another lawyer. He's going to hire this lawyer. And we're going to help him with the funds. But we need support. We need monthly contributions. We need people to really understand, the magnitude of this. Yeah. And we have to help this gentleman in Illinois. He's got a 14-year-old daughter who was home when he was arrested, who, is having a lot of anxiety ever since. And he's got a baby on the way. What happens at the end of the year when his baby's born if we don't have some kind of control over this? And we're not going to get control over this until January of 2025 when we have a new administration. Mm-hmm. So we have to keep this conversation going, Sharona. We really do.
Absolutely. And I want to just do a little tease with this also. There's going to be a very special event hosted in New Jersey on June 1st. Is the date we're looking at right now. This is an annual fundraising event where the money it's been 2.5 years now that you've been doing this, knowing what's needed and projecting that there's 1,500 more people that are going to be arrested, multiply that by the family needs and what's going to be happening there because your organization, I think you said it earlier a little bit, but I mean, not just shoes, but we're talking mortgages, attorneys' fees, I can't remember what it's called, but when you're in prison anyway, money is sent there to help for just daily little things that people need. Thank you, commissary.
But you know what else, Sharona? You know what else? Do you know how many women who have had? We had a wife in Florida 2 years ago when we first got going with everything. She had a busted pipe that came up and flooded her entire home. She had no water in her house because they had to turn the water off so they could replace the pipe and fix the pipe. Where was she going? Her husband's in jail. She lives in a state where her family doesn't, live. What was going to happen to her? Well, we happened to her. We put her in a hotel for 3 weeks and we helped her pay for that that pipe to be fixed.
Mhm.
She didn't have the money, you know? And so, I mean, there's so many stories, there's so many avenues that we are covering, not just rent, not just mortgage, not just legal fees, things like that, that nobody, like you, I, I don't even know if you would have given that any kind of thought.
Right.
We have to continue to do this work because there is so many. I mean, you have men that have been sentenced to, prison for 12, 13,
Yes.
14, 18
Mhm.
years.
Mhm.
And some of them have wives. You have the Megs family. It's not just the husband that's in prison for 12 years, it's his wife that's in prison as well. And you have their children and their grandchildren that are being, left behind. We helped that family. We helped that family, come to DC. That's another thing we do. We cover
Mhm.
travel expenses. We help with hotel fees. We help with,
Mhm.
plane fare. We help with train fare. We help with gas if somebody's going to drive. There is so much that we are doing and covering, but if we don't continue to get support, this is going to come to an end. It's in the near future. And
Yes. So
so,
again,
you know,
yes, I want everybody heading over. And we just share that one more time right now, and then we're going to bring our next guest in, and we'll keep this up. Don't worry, as we'll keep kind of bringing this up so people can see. But I just want everybody to head over, and again, consider being a monthly contributor. Make this part of your tithe. We are our brother's keeper. This is what we're called to do, and they're in need. I mean, that things have never been worse than they are under the Biden administration. We all know that economically, anyway. And then you remove the primary breadwinner out of the family, and you're left with an absolute disaster. We don't want that. We're not going to let these people who stood up for us, we're not going to let their families fail without them there. We're not going to allow that to happen. Again,
and
multiple ways
Sharona,
to
we're we're
donate. Hmm.
we're looking for sponsors for our upcoming
Hmm.
events. We have a few events happening over the summer, and we're looking for sponsorship. It could be a business, it could be an individual. They will be, publicized at our events. They will be thanked, by our
Yes.
entire team and our speakers. And Jerry Perna we're very close. That's my best girl, and she plans all these events with me. She supports all these events. She comes and speaks. She helps me. We have to get the Matthew Lawrence Perna Act passed. She'll talk about
That's
that if
right.
she comes on. There's just
Yep.
so much, Sharona, so much. Thank you.
Well, stay with me. We're going to bring in your nephew, who was actually the mobilize, or maybe he was the he was the little flame. He was the flame that lit the bomb here. Because really, Cynthia, you have stepped in and done something the government did not expect to have happen. So taking care of those left behind, but a lot of that happened because of Tim Hale. And Tim, thank you so much for being with us on America's Mom. We met on January 6th at the special tribute that you guys had for all of the families that came out, and I got to meet them. I get to meet these wonderful families, these teenagers, young babies, little kids, toddlers, everybody waiting and wanting dad to come home, and hearing how difficult things have been. And one of the things I marveled about with you, Tim, is the selflessness I heard in you when you were talking with Cynthia about, I don't, your life is as significant as anyone else. What I appreciated was you understanding that there are women and children that have been left behind, families that need to be cared for, and that is true religion, right? Is to take care of the widow and the orphan, and you really encompass that. And I know you talk a lot about being an imperfect man who is doing right by his country and right by all of these wonderful people, and you're not going to let them be left behind. And I really respect that. So thank you for being with us and being here to tell your story today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So,
Where should I begin?
you were so eloquent on January 6th. This is a topic again. I know people jumping in and they're saying January 6th, I don't want to touch this because it's so close to home. It's so personal. And it was very difficult just to start from the beginning. Why were you there on January 6th? What did that look like for you? And then we can walk into a 3-year prison term that you just finished.
Sure. I would like to think that, like most people, I was there basically just to hear a speech. So going to the Capitol building was not even on my radar. I had gotten off my overnight shift. I threw on a suit and tie, and I just blasted down the road from New Jersey to DC. And after a 4-hour drive, I was just there to listen to Trump speak. I don't think most people knew anything was going to happen at the Capitol building. And even when I posted these videos on social media that I could finally get off my phone after 3 years of incarceration, You can even hear people in my recordings when I'm at the Ellipse recording Trump's speech. You can hear people saying there's some kind of a march going on. So people were leaving the area to go to the Capitol before Trump finished speaking. And Trump said we were going to go to the Capitol to peacefully protest. He didn't say we were going to knock barriers over and, set the world on fire. He didn't say we were going to burn the country down like Antifa. That never even occurred to me. And it didn't occur, I don't think, to the vast majority of people who were there. So the answer to the basic answer is I was just there for a speech. The end. I assumed after the speech that I was probably just going to go home or something like that. I didn't know what to expect. I was hoping that, our presence in, our nation's capital would have maybe, turned the tide, that our representatives would have, issued some redress for our grievances. And the election could have been saved. But I wasn't even idealistic about it. I thought it was a long shot too. So
what were you wearing, Tim? What did you wear to the Capitol that day?
I wore a suit and a tie. Actually, it's funny enough because I just said I worked overnights. I was a security officer and I ran a security union. So when I got off my shift, actually, but before I even started my shift, I actually went to Men's Warehouse. I got a brand new pair of dress shoes the night before. So I actually went like several days without sleep. Like I was exhausted when I was there. So it was actually kind of a pain in the butt just to be in DC, especially after working an overnight shift, and I was exhausted. But the worst part was just my feet hurt like hell because of those dang new dress shoes. So
yeah, you got to break those things in. There, that was my 19-year-old just learned that. Why did you feel so compelled then? Why did you feel that you needed to be down there? If all the inconveniences you're speaking of, and yet you felt a certain obligation, why?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to try to be like a huckster here and say like I had a mandate from heaven to be there. Like there was, I just had this inkling. But I'm a citizen, and I was there for Trump's inauguration. I went there with a friend to witness the presidential parade back in 2017. I haven't been in DC that many times, but this was going to be a historic day regardless. It was either going to be the beginning of Trump's second term, or it was going to be the end of his first. And I wanted to be a part of that, and I wanted to be there to show my support. And not for nothing, this wasn't just any presidency. And it wasn't even just Trump, who I love. It was a stolen election. If ever there was a time for me to get off my butt and as someone from Middle America and just show my support, if there was ever a time for me, to voice my support for a political candidate, it was then. They stole an election, and I don't care if that's politically incorrect. I don't care. I mean, everybody knows it. We watched it. I literally watched them stop counting and then pick up at like 2 a.m. I mean, we all know what happens. I mean,
right.
It's just it was. Look, Nixon, Kennedy, Bush, Gore. Like, it's not like this is the first time people questioned elections, but this was so in your face. It couldn't go. It just couldn't be allowed. And so I had to be there as a citizen. It was my duty. And even it was my duty as a citizen. I swore an oath to the Constitution, and they'll try to flip that on its head and say that we were insurrectionists, but quite to the contrary. We're American citizens, and the government serves us, not the other way around.
You swore an oath to our country. You served this country already before.
I served 12 years. 12 years. And hey, look, I don't want to embellish. I mostly worked in an office. I wasn't Rambo, but if our oaths mean anything, then when we see the country on fire collapsing, we have to at the very least say something. And at the very, I would like to think that just being there for a speech was something. And that was really it. There was no plan. It's funny. I'll just say this. That NCIS, they had my roommate wear a wire to try to record me saying like there was this like demonic plan to topple democracy. It's literally on my recording. He asked me what was the plan. I said there wasn't one. I was just there for a speech, and then they started shooting at us and they pissed us off. That was it. And so they
So,
knew this.
and so from your experience, everything was going well until the DC police, was it the Capitol Police or the DC police that fired into the crowd?
I want to be fair and say there were definitely elements inside the Capitol Police that allowed the things that happened that day to go on, and I could explain that for a myriad of reasons involving the CCTV cameras, but primarily I'll say that it was actually the Metro PD who did the kind of things that allowed it to escalate from civil disturbance to a full-blown riot. There were agitators in the crowd. And this is multifaceted, so I don't blame. It's not that all the protesters were good, all the cops were bad, all the cops were good, the protesters were bad. There were these elements planted on both sides that basically allowed it to escalate and snowball into this thing. But barriers were knocked over around the perimeter of the Capitol building before Trump finished his speech. Now, I didn't know that. The average person who went to the Capitol building had no idea about that. That happened a half hour before I showed up. So, and again, I post these videos on Twitter and stuff like that. You can literally see there's an ocean of people on the western terrace of the Capitol grounds. And the vast majority of people are just chilling. We're singing God Bless America. Nobody even knows, for the most part, that there's anything even happening when it comes to the police. So, yeah, but there were agitators in the crowd who were trying to basically incite the cops into attacking the crowd. And if you're an average person there, you don't see this. And if you're the average American who watches the same 20-second clips from CNN and all the other fake news for 3 years, you don't know this either. But there are agitators, there are assets in the crowd, and they're getting the cops to essentially attack the crowd, but they're not attacking the agitators. Primarily, they're actually attacking bystanders. And this, I hate to say it, it's an us versus them mentality, but you see that as an American citizen, you get a little indignant, like, hey, that's not cool. You just body slammed an old lady. It doesn't, like, there's really never an excuse for that. And so this ends up leading to further and further escalation. And so agitator attacks the cops attack the crowd gets mad, the crowd gets more, escalates it with the cops. And that's basically what happened. But there were also people, carnival barkers, people with bullhorns, directing people to do certain things. And that's really what it was. It was a setup.
I'm on your Twitter right now. I just want to point everybody to this. There's excellent footage on there. People need to go and see this stuff for themselves, because the narrative that's put out by the MSM and the Biden regime, and it is a regime, we are under tyranny right now in America, is not consistent with the facts of the day. And so you're going to be able to see a lot of firsthand footage that has never been seen before. It's never been played on MSM before. This is your private footage from that day. This is incredible to be able to go and watch it firsthand, not to mention that with your massive, like, these are mad administrative skills you have, Tim, the way that you document and can talk about exactly what happened that day. Is why I was really anxious to have you on to just clarify from your end what you saw, but also the experience you had afterwards. So I want to encourage everybody to head over to X after we're done here and follow Tim Hale over there, because you're going to see a whole nother side of things that I haven't seen anybody be able to articulate who has been associated with J6. I think it's really critical to say that, and very important to understand. You don't have, this isn't about animosity at this point. It's about educating the public as to what went on, and then what has transpired once you were targeted, number one. And if people missed it, they actually went through your roommate, had him wear a wire, tried to entrap you, but there was nothing to entrap. So walk us through, what did they eventually charge you with, and tell us more about what they charged you with and what the 1512 suit is all about. Help us understand this.
Sure. So I initially was charged with the same ridiculous misdemeanors, like, trespassing, entering or remaining, whatever that the average person gets. They're like the default misdemeanors. They eventually indicted me after arresting me with the charge, as you just said, obstruction of an official proceeding, 18 USC 1512. This is a statute that goes back to the 80s. It primarily has to do with witness tampering. Back in 2003, there was a sub-statute added after the Enron scandal. And this didn't so much have to do with witness tampering, but it had to do essentially with the destruction of evidence. So the destruction of documents. And so that's that's really all it was. It was a sub-statute about the destruction of evidence, and it had to do with limiting the ability of Congress in particular to have an investigation. Because we think of Congress as the legislative branch, and that's true. It's not the judicial branch, but it does have quasi-judicial powers. So it has the powers of inquiry. So, we see committees and they have hearings and blah, blah, blah. So they have the ability to request information, stuff like that. So that's really the purview of this. But anyway, totally out of context. And, if you study case law, you'll see that there are instances where there are novel approaches to things, where the government will apply a charge in a manner that it's not intended to, but sometimes the courts will uphold it. But this is so far beyond the scope of what its initial intention was. And so January 6th, okay, you don't have to like it. You can actively dislike it. But the idea of charging someone with a sub-statute for a primary statute that has to do with witness tampering, that's just not what was going on. The vote certification for the 2020 election is not an official proceeding in the sense of 18 USC 1512. In fact, there is another statute they theoretically could have used that would have been more fitting, but they wouldn't have been able to charge people theoretically up to 20 years. Right. So, this was all planned. And this is the territory where people don't like to get into. But when I was in the DC jail, there were informants in there who confessed that they went to the Capitol to get out of trouble for drug conspiracies from the year before in 2020. And so these are also the first defendants who actually had 18 USC 1512 upheld in federal court, which means that the first defendants to have the first time the federal courts upheld 1512 for January 6th was for federal informants. And so this means that, let's just call it for what it is. They not only planned this for January 6th defendants, they almost certainly used this to target President Trump. So this wasn't just to crush him in 2020. It was also a backup plan to stop him in 2024. I'm hoping and I'm praying, not just for, President Trump's sake, but also really for the country, because this is really the end of our empire. It's going to collapse if this kind of stuff keeps happening, but also for the men that I rotted away with who still are locked up and who are going to do a lot more years behind bars because this stupid, illegitimate charge. I'm hoping SCOTUS tosses this out. Most people, there seems to be a consensus that it's going to be tossed out, and rightly so. It's an illegitimate charge. And it just seems like with all these charges, even the civil disorder charge that some people have, that goes back to the race riot era. So the Civil Obedience Act of I think it was the 1960s. It could have been the 70s. I think it was 1968. 70s. But all the same, like this is how ridiculous they have to get with what we're calling lawfare now. If they can absolutely do it to me, they can do it to you. If they can do it to President Trump, they can do it to anybody. And it's completely out of control. And I'll just say this one last thing. The one last thing I'll say is this: you can tell that this is really we're at the end of our ropes, and that we don't have real leadership because granted, President Trump has said that he's going to do the right thing for us, and I take him at his word. And I hope to God he gets in, but it's really a condemnation of the current system and the illegitimate regime we have now, because George Washington and John Adams, the first presidents we had, they pardoned people involved in Freeze Rebellion. They pardoned people involved in the early we'll say civil disorders of the American Republic. And especially Adams, especially as someone who was trained in law, he had not only the knowledge but also the virtue, the mercy to look at what he called them miserable Germans who couldn't, illiterate immigrants in Pennsylvania or whatever. And he said, these were just rioters. They were engaged in a riot. This was not an insurrection. And so he pardoned them. And even Abraham Lincoln, in the Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in our history, what did Lincoln say? With malice toward none. And so if you really want to be a unifier, which President Biden keeps saying that's what he wants to do, you wouldn't be doing this. This is an inquisition. This is not about justice. So I'm sorry. That's the last thing. I'm sorry for rambling, but history major, I throw that in there.
I
know,
appreciate that. I really appreciate that perspective, because you're exactly right. If it was intended for the country to unify, then things would be put in their proper perspective, but it's not. It is to pick off those who aggressively understand the Constitution, aggressively understand the proper role of government and where it ends, and where the people really have this control. It is of and by and for the people. It is not of and by and for government. So actually, sheesh, Tim, on another day, we're going to come back and talk about the ruling yesterday then, because the First Amendment is under unbelievable duress and attack in America already. But to have the SCOTUS say that the government has special rights above the people is insane. I don't know what country I'm living in. And I don't know what constitution they're reading, or who's, if we could get back to the originalist and just have the actual documents that we're comparing every case by, rather than this whole idea of case law. I hate case law. It does not defer to the original intention of our protected freedoms in this country and our rights in this country. It's got us where we're at right now, where we're throwing people in prison for 3 years for obstruction of a proceeding. This is insanity. And not only that, but when this happens, just a reminder, when you have this on your tag now, and it follows you around from job to job, your career, your social circles, all the things that you want to do, this is with you now. And to be so flippant and so, just disregarding of people's actual lives and how this affects them and impacts them now is one of the most, I think it's one of the most alarming things from a party that supposedly is all about, forgiving everybody for everything they've ever done, no matter what. Oh, and let's accept all the pedophiles and the trans and all the others. But if you're a freedom-loving American, you're going to prison for the rest of your life. You see just the hypocrisy there. So it's very politically motivated. This has nothing to do with the betterment of America. So I agree with you 100%. I wanted to backtrack for a minute, because this is the most interesting part for people who've been trying to understand about FBI informants and how this all works. And I myself have wanted to know, when I first heard that people were calling me and my family, me and my husband, FBI informants, I knew that was like probably worse than any cuss word you could ever call somebody, because you're giving up the truth in order to protect yourself. You're doing things in order to protect your own self, rather than looking out for the welfare of others. And I was pretty upset, more than upset. I've been super devastated to have that title anywhere near me, because it's not true. But how does one become an FBI informant? And how did you know? Like, talk a little bit more about that. Like, what category? I remember you kind of talking in categories. I really want people to listen to this for a moment, how this kind of happens. Because we have this idea of it's FBI agents with their little dockers and penny loafers. Okay, that's one thing. And then you have what? Walk us through what that looks like, an FBI informant.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, let's address the elephant in the room. There were agents there, like actual agents. We've basically, at this point, I think just recently, it was a couple of days ago, they're now reporting that they're actually, the CIA actually deployed assets to the Capitol on January 6th. So CIA, DOD, DHS, and FBI, which, part of the DOJ, actually BOP even had some assets.
Yeah. Did the FDA have people? Did the IRS have people?
Probably. And so, this is like in the echelons. Yeah, at the top, you had literal agents. You had G-men there of various groups. And you also had a lot of interesting characters there who, like former CIA station chiefs who are now like influencers and stuff like that, especially on the East Side. Everybody wants to talk about Ray Epps, but there were people there who are very suspicious who never got charged. And there's a lot of names. If you go on Twitter, don't just look at my stuff. Look at a guy, Free State Will. He has investigated a lot, and he has actually shown that there were a lot of what he calls the Fed Brigade. And so there are a lot of people with top secret security clearances there. People who are historically involved in psyops, historically involved in promoting CIA propaganda, disinformation. So there were all kinds of suspicious actors there, even if they're officially, retired. But the next echelon, I guess, would be we'll just call them informants. And so a lot of this, I would say a third of the people that I had met a lot of people I had met were actually people who were turned out by the feds. So these are people who got in trouble, and in order to get out of trouble, they decided basically to play dress up, play pretend for a day, and provide footage for the feds. So this comes in different flavors, actually. So I just said they provide footage. There are a lot of people there. If you really look at what's available, there are a lot of people there who just have their phones out to record people's faces. And this is not new. If you look at like some of the other events in the past few years, a lot of people do this. The feds will put in assets on the ground who are just there to provide photo verification of who is actually there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how a lot of the indictments end up playing out. So, one of the guys I was locked up with, I actually looked through his indictment papers, and a lot of, like the actual video evidence is only corroborated by certain defendants who, get like no time at all. They get a misdemeanor or whatever, or even a felony sometimes, and they get absolutely no time, and then they just disappear. So a lot of the video evidence that is used in the discovery process that's provided in these evidence productions for defendants actually comes from other people who are on the ground who don't get in trouble. And so it's kind of obvious what's going on there. And theoretically, you could say, well, these are just people who went there and then they, to get out of trouble, they offered this stuff. And that's probably true too. That exists as well. So you got people who sold out, like who sold their souls to get out of trouble. That's it. I mean, that's a universal thing. You see that all the time. Snitching is what it is. Not everybody has integrity, but you do have people who went there as part of a job. They were obligated to go there to provide stuff for the feds. And that also, this doesn't just end at evidence. It doesn't just end at that. It also includes assaulting cops. So there were people there who were intentionally there to incite the crowd to fight the cops, and a lot of them actually hit the cops themselves. And a great example, I think, is this guy who was there in a costume. He and his co-defendant were there with cameras so that they could record this stupid narrative for the insurrection. Actually, now I think about it, those are the same guys who got the 1512 first upheld. And one's there and he's wearing an orange hoodie over a motorcycle jacket over another orange shirt. They're there playing pretend. They're LARPing like they're insurrectionists, and like they're lying on the ground recording themselves. They stop recording, they get up, and they go to a different spot. And then one of the other guys that's with them, again, it's one dude who's doing these costume changes. The other guy's there in like a Star Wars costume. He's like a TIE fighter or something like that. I don't remember what it was. But I mean, it's just ridiculous. You have people who were there as either caricatures of what they think a Trump supporter is. So, they want to make Trump supporters look like they're, backwards idiots. And you have other people there who were like meant to make us look insane by wearing ridiculous, outfits or whatever. But overall, there's just different roles. And so one of the videos you can look at, I posted this. There's a guy who is able to open the magnetic doors, the magnetic locks for the Columbus door, which is what allowed people to enter on the east side of the building. This is where the Oath Keepers got in trouble. The Oath Keepers were accused of breaking the Columbus doors and being behind that breach and stuff like that because they really had nothing on them. The Oath Keepers didn't do anything wrong. But there was a guy before they showed up who goes to the door. He's on the inside. He tries to open the door from the inside, and he can't do it. And then he looks up at the CCTV camera. He points at the door, and then he's able to open the door up. And I mean, Cindy can attest to this. At my trial, they said they monitor all the CCTV in a facility off-site. So I don't know how far away it is from the Capitol building, but there is a facility where the Capitol Police are watching the CCTV. So that means they're watching this dude trying to open the door. He can't do it. He points at it, and then it opens up. Who unlocked the magnetic locks? It's obvious, I mean, we can only use the Socratic method for, so long. We have body camera footage now of there are these, I think they're one of the bike squads. I can't remember the exact squad, but there's body camera footage we have. You can find this, and it's like the cops are saying, they set us up. They waited 2 hours to call us. They set us up. It's like, and it's like, well, who set them up though?
Right.
Who set them up?
Yes.
The Metro PD answered to Mayor Bowser, and the Capitol PD answered to Nancy Pelosi at the time, Speaker Pelosi. So, I mean, we all know Trump offered National Guard support.
Yeah, that's right.
We're hearing all these things now about, well, maybe this general, was screwing it up or this, that, the other thing. All the same. Look, let's just call a spade a spade. It wasn't Trump's fault. Trump didn't make anybody do anything. And this was a setup. And it wasn't just a setup against us. It was a setup against President Trump. And there were actors there. And that's not to mention, there were Antifa there. Now, I'm not going to say everybody there that did a bad thing was Antifa. That's just not true. But there were Antifa there. They bragged about it. There were actually some Antifa that were they actually had, it was one that had a gun, and they actually got released by the Metro PD. They got arrested and they just let him go. So I mean,
oh wow,
yeah,
that's fascinating.
I was in jail with several Antifa. One of his name was Zach Alam, and he was actually the guy who broke the window where Ashley Babbitt got shot. There's another guy who tried to cover that up. Actually, one guy went to the hole. He linked up with Zach Alam, and they came back, and he tried to cover it up and convince us that he was a Trump supporter instead of Antifa. So there's a lot of that. But again, it's not just one thing. It's not easy. This is very mixed. It's very complicated. So there's no easy answer here. And so I just want to say, people need to realize the feds have been doing this for decades. They just don't realize it's in our country now. But
absolutely. Real quick, Tim.
You have the insurrection narrative over here, and that's fake. But you also have another fake controlled counter narrative, which is supposed to make us think that all the January 6 guys are on the same side too. It's actually, no, there are a lot of bad actors over here, and we need to be very careful. We need to really look at this stuff, because there were people there who, were trying to entrap people. And this was entrapment. It was absolutely entrapment. There were suspicious actors, and we really need to look at it. I would say even before Trump, I would caution against a blanket pardon, just because I don't want him pardoning the people who entrapped all the guys, all my friends who are rotting in prison. I don't want the people who entrapped them to get pardoned. And I don't want the people who set President Trump up to get pardoned, because that's not right for him. That's
absolutely. Absolutely. For those who are just joining us, we're getting an influx as people are getting off work and finding us and finding this interview right now. We're talking with Cynthia Hughes of the Patriot Freedom Project and helping families of J6 and those who are left behind, and Tim Hale, who just spent 3 years in prison for obstruction of a proceeding charge. Never been anything like this in America that I've ever heard of. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Grace has been bestowed many, many times. And certainly we haven't sought out and had a quota for American citizens, supposedly, that we're trying to fulfill in order to create a need for domestic terrorists. But I guess that's where we're at in America now. We've heard that several times from FBI whistleblowers. And Tim, you've definitely got caught up in all of this, of the government going after weaponizing their offices and their taxpayer-funded bureaus to go after American citizens. So the last 3 years, I want to talk about this, what this was been like for you. And the informant part is really, really critical too. And those who were, I want to talk more about this. This is not the only conversation we're having, but I want to come back to that again in just a few minutes here. But I want to dive into the 3 years that you spent in prison. You served your country for 12 years. You worked hard. I mean, there's been no gaps there. You led a union, a security union. You've been a responsible person. This is, you're not some schmo off the street. And you ended up going to prison for 3 years based off of these trumped up charges. And what was that like? It's such a stupid question, to be honest with you. I really don't know how to ask it, because it's just so stupid.
I am a
to be
schmo.
like, what was that like? But you know what I'm saying? Like this, I've talked to only Michael Eckert once he was let out, and he only spent 11 months. Well, he spent 11 months maximum security prison with the worst of the worst of the worst people on the planet. Most of them not even citizens of this country. And so what happened to you?
Well, I got picked up fairly early. And so it's funny enough, I got transferred to the local jail in Monmouth County. And, everybody was adamant that I'm going to be going home soon. I'm like, no, I'm not. It's not going to happen. But I actually ended up having a bond hearing in front of the magistrate judge. And she was very reasonable. She was just like, I mean, they tried to think of any reason they could. He's mean. He has he has bad memes on his phone. He's a jerk. It's just like, guilty, but that's not a crime. So I actually got granted bonds, and then the government appealed it. And so I actually ended up having to go all the way to Essex County up in Newark. The marshals, the government appealed my bond status, so I had to go all the way to DC to go in front of another bond hearing in front of the district judge, which was eventually denied. But after I went to Monmouth County, I ended up having to go up to Essex County up by New York, Newark. The marshals drove us to, actually it wasn't the marshals, it was the local cops, but we got driven up to New York. We flew all the way to Oklahoma. I think it was Grady County Jail. The marshals then flew us all the way to West Virginia. Then we drove to what's called the Northern Neck, Virginia Regional Jail. I think it's also called the Warsaw Jail. Was there for a little bit. And then finally, we got driven to Washington, D.C. And so we were in the D.C. jail. And so I spent about 2 years there, because obviously my bond was denied, and then it was denied again, and then it was denied again. And then I ran out of lives. So, oh well. So yeah, I mean, I'm there for 2 years. I go to trial after, it took me 16 months to get a trial. Now in DC, you have what's called the Speedy Trial Act. So everybody knows constitutionally, I would think everybody would know, like in the Bill of Rights, you have a right to a fair and speedy trial.
Yeah.
But
of your peers.
Yeah,
very important, very critical part of that. The founders understood.
Yeah, and a jury of your peers. You're supposed to have a lot of rights under the Bill of Rights. And you're also supposed to have, the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, and that didn't apply to Trump supporters either. But because of the way the legal system works, and you mentioned the common law system, you have constitutional law, as in what the Constitution actually says, then you have statutory law, and then you have common law, which is made decided by the courts. But the statutory law has to really put the constitutional clauses into effect to make it basically understandable and executable. So the Speedy Trial Act speculates it's like, I think it's like 70 days. You have 70 days for a speedy trial. But what happens is the government says, we don't wanna. There's too much evidence. It's hard for us to put, there's just so much going on. We have all these other cases, there's a big investigation, greatest investigation in American history, yada, yada. It's like, well, okay, but maybe you should have investigated before you arrested. Apparently not, because for 16 months, remember, it's supposed to be 70 days, really, 16 months for me to go to trial. They kept tolling my speedy trial clock. And what that essentially is the government's like, can you not count a speedy trial? And the judge would be theoretically, I'm not saying this happened, but this happened. The judge would be like, I'm going to toll his speedy trial clock in the interest of justice or whatever. And so basically, they don't have to actually count the time you're incarcerated. And it's even worse in my case because I'm a pretrial detainee. So I can't leave. I can't go to Wawa or 7-Eleven and or go grab a burger or something while I'm waiting to get a trial. Actually, I got to sit in a 7-foot concrete cube for 16 months.
And that was unique. That was unique to this particular situation because they were screaming insurrection, and the judges went along with it. Is that essentially what's happened here? Because I just can't believe this. It's really, my husband worked in criminal justice. My brother-in-law actually ran pretrial. We never heard of this before. When it was happening, I kept deferring to my husband. Is like this normal? So, and he's no. He said they're so worried about the victim's rights usually, or excuse me, the criminal. You're not a criminal, but in this situation, he's just saying usually they're so worried about the criminal's rights that they bend over backwards to make sure that they have all of these benefits, and they would never hold somebody in jail without the opportunity to get. I mean, it's just insane all the stuff that's gone on. It would never happen as a pretrial, as a term of pretrial settlement. Never.
Yeah, I mean, pretrial, if you read the case law, pretrial detention is the exception. Liberty is the rule. That is, all the case law says this. Wow. The exception is supposed to be like viciously violent, potentially drug trafficking and, flight risks and stuff like that. And this really didn't apply to the vast majority of people. And I'm going to delve away from myself for a second just to say this. Like at the time, the Chief Justice was Judge Beryl Howell. And she came up with this special category of criminals for January 6th defendants. And it was called the Cressman 6 factors. And so she took one of the Proud Boys, Billy Cressman. She turned him into a patsy, basically as a Trojan horse to screw over any defendant that they wanted. And so they looked at all these different factors like, should we defend or should we detain? Should we not detain? And it had nothing to do with what the actual case law at the time was. There were all these different factors. Well, did they say inappropriate things, or were they charged with a felony, or this, that, and the other thing? It's like, well, that's
like a point system.
Yeah, I mean, they made up their own rules for January 6th defendants. I mean, and that's actually what happened. And then eventually you had what was called the Munchell decision, where this guy Eric Munchell, he eventually got bond. He was and that's great, but then they kind of selectively chose who that ruling applied to. And what they decided in the Munchell decision was, well, you're not a member of an organization like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers, and you're not suspected of currently being involved in more crime. And basically, if you didn't have that, then you're free to go. We'll give you bond, yada yada. But that didn't apply across the board, excuse me. And so basically a lot of these judges were kind of just making up rules as they went along. And that's why January 6th was, a horrible Trojan horse, because the pendulum can always swing back in the other direction. By doing this, they created new case law. And even though it's bad case law, it's a precedent. You create a precedent, and now you open the floodgates. Now this can be used against leftists. And I just want to say, like, the feds used to target leftists. I'm not a leftist, but I ran a union. It's just, if you really know the history of unions, unions used to be targeted by the government. You know that the civil rights movement used to be targeted by the government. The anti-war movement, the peace movement used to be targeted by the government. I mean, like, the pendulum can always swing back in one direction or the other. And so you don't want to create a precedent that can be used to destroy your enemies, because they could always use it to destroy you. It goes against the principle of due process. And I mean, what's the saying? An injustice to one is an injustice to all. An injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. And justice delayed is justice denied. So, but anyway, the time I spent in the DC jail, it wasn't all horrific, but I was still a pretrial detainee. And so, we talk about the exception versus, the rule, the exception. So the reason why we even allow pretrial detainee status is that in theory, yes, you are being detained and your ability to leave is limited, but theoretically, you still have all the civil rights as anyone else. So you have free speech, you have freedom of religion, you can, address your captors for redress of grievances, yada, yada, yada. It's not real. It's not real. So you're in jail. You're in jail, and especially because of COVID, because Washington, D.C. is just like any deep blue state with the lockdown stuff. That was really what made the first year pretty bad, because it was constant lockdowns. We were locked down ourselves 23 hours a day. And because eventually, like, we had so many inmates at one point, we had to alternate when people were allowed out. So it was like 4 people were allowed out at a time for 1 hour. So it actually would be over 24 hours before you could get out of your cell to make a phone call or take a shower, because they had to alternate between which 4 people could go out. But we were denied religious services because of COVID. We can't get too many people, COVID. You were denied visits from your family. A lot of legal visits with lawyers were denied. Even access to your evidence, like, they wouldn't even let you sit down and review your discovery. There were so many instances, even basic medical care, like, there were so many ways in which we were not treated like regular pretrial detainees should be treated, because we were denied the basic necessities and civil rights of a regular citizen, detained or not. And again, we were not convicted. And that's why pretrial detainee status is a very particular thing. It's not just anybody who's in jail or in prison because of whatever. We were in a very specific status where we did not go to trial, and we were detained for whatever reasons. And so we were still entitled to a free person. So, but that was, it got better with time. I'm not going to lie. It did get better with time. But,
well, did it get better, or did you just get used to it? Because I want to read this, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Actually, Cynthia had sent it to me, and I just thought, this has never been my reality in life. And I just want people to listen for a moment. As I sit out by the water, a quote, free man, I can't help but feel the toll incarceration has had on me. After 3 years behind bars, my body feels 10 years older. Despite getting LASIK eye surgery before my arrest and having 20/20 vision, I find it hard to keep my eyes open outside in natural lighting. I spent 3 years inundated with artificial lighting and little sunlight. Now spring is here. I can enjoy the sensation of bugs landing on my skin to feed off my sweat. While in jail, I rarely saw any forms of life whatsoever. My concrete cell had a window that amounted to little more than a 3-inch slot, and my only view was a graveyard. This was appropriate because that jail was where Liberty went to die. The silver lining is that I have fresh air and my lungs will no longer be contaminated by moldy vents. The sunlight will help rejuvenate my skin and heal my sores. And soon, when the beach is open, the salt in the sea will cleanse whatever parasites are left in my flesh. You wrote that.
I did. Not trying to brag. I'm kind of a poet, I guess. But, you know, sorry. No,
I read it and it made my guts turn inside out to know that we're doing this to what should be free men. We're doing this to people who did not commit any crimes, who are above reproach in this area. And this is what we're doing. And we're going to do it at least 1,500 times more. That's what's got me in a bind thinking about, Tim, that this is going to be the reality. And for how long? As you said, there's people being sentenced a whole lot longer. And for what? We had a congressman pull a fire alarm during a proceeding, and because he didn't want to take a vote on a topic, and he wasn't charged with obstruction of a proceeding. I mean, there's no measure of equality or real justice or equity or any of the things they say they believe in this whole effort. And like you said, I mean, the decline in people's health in these, dungeons. What was that like, watching not only you, but the people around you deteriorate?
There was a 71-year-old Vietnam veteran that was in the jail with me named Lonnie Kaufman. His hands were purple because he had the circulation was going in his hands. He couldn't get proper treatment. There were times when, because of his age, like he would fall and, he would be injured and bruised, hurt his shoulders. And especially, I mean, let's just say this. In those jails, I mean, again, it's a jail. It's not, you're not at a hotel. It's not a 5-star, it's not a suite, but, you have these 1-inch thick foam mattresses without pillows. So you have this old man with back problems who's having to sleep on this crap for, over a year. And he wasn't the only old person there. I mean, and so, I mean, not to play a little violin, but yeah, we had senior citizens that were in there with us, and you had people with genuine other medical issues, and even just, and again, maybe it's petty, but I don't think it is. My friend Pete Schwartz, he went over 10 months with expired eye contacts that he couldn't stop using because he couldn't see. It took Marjorie Taylor Greene coming into the jail to pressure the jail so that he could get new contacts. I mean, it's in every way, it was just efficient. Now, I also want to be fair here too. There were a lot of people in the DC jail that weren't January 6th defendants. And so the whole penal system really needs to be reformed, but especially in Washington, DC, that jail is a mess. We had it a little differently. In some ways, maybe we're a little more privileged because we could afford more commissary, I guess. But in other ways, it was like we still couldn't go to religious services. Even after the end of the COVID lockdown nonsense, we still, they told people, they lied to people and told them that if they got the shot, if they got the COVID vaccine, then they could see their families, and they didn't do it. That they could get haircuts and they couldn't do it, and they could have religious services, they couldn't do it. I did not get a haircut for 16 months. I was in the military my whole adult life. I'd never had long hair. So by the time I went to trial, my hair was down to my shoulders. I have photos I posted on Twitter. You can see I look like a caveman. And so instead of Cusinelli, they called me Caveman Ellie. They denied people the ability to clip their own fingernails. There were sewer flies in the shower. And so, I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's just like, again, it's a jail.
There were what? Back up.
Sewer flies, those little nasty black things that show up near drains and stuff when there's open sewage. But,
cold water, the plumbing.
Yeah,
you guys didn't have hot water. I mean, these aren't petty things, because remember, the basis of all of this is that you committed a crime. a crime that was worthy of being thrown in these maximum security hellholes, not seeing the light of day for 3 years almost, being in solitary confinement for 2 of those years. Like, this is what we're talking about here, is punishment for people who've committed crimes, and maybe that needs to be looked at, obviously, too. But when we're looking at the majority of these people who've been incarcerated the way that you were, sentenced unjustly, unfairly, overly sentenced, at any rate, no matter what, no matter how you look at it, this is wrong. This is treatment that is reserved or would be reserved for criminals. And we would say, oh, okay, you know, well, they did this, that, or the other. But in this situation, that's what we're having. That's why we're having this conversation, is because you didn't do anything. You didn't break any laws. You didn't violate any laws. People were, you know, that's what I really want to get across to everyone. The majority of the people stories from January 6th, they're not even going to tell them publicly because they're afraid of retaliation. Number one, they're afraid of being retaliated against once they start talking about their situation and their stories. And number two, because of the shame, the public shaming. I'm hearing stories of people like hiding out and not working for, like, just overcome with guilt and shame. For what? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, this is so unjust. It's so wrong. We're allowing MS-13. We're allowing cannibals now. You know, crazy psychotic cannibals across our borders now, giving them a $10,000, you know, welfare card and saying, have fun in America, while we incarcerate American patriots who showed up on January 6th to hear what President Trump had to say and be there to witness this moment in history. It's just, it is not, there's no justice here. There's no justice here.
It's about sending a message. Don't ever stand up for your country ever again. I mean, and again, just the pretrial stuff in and of itself, you know, that was very early on. And so, you know, over time, more and more people did start getting bond, and they tried to, you know, they stopped doing the, you know, the Soviet style gulag thing. But even that was just, it was really just a way to crush people's spirits and get them to take plea deals. Especially, and again, I have, you know, I can endure quite a lot. You know, if I had to do more time, I could have. And if I had to do it all over again for, you know, if it meant someone else wouldn't, then I would do that too. But you think about like the guys who were in there, not like me, the guys who were, you know, married or, you know, who had families, kids and stuff like that. Think about the weight that's on top of something like that's, you know, on someone's shoulders. A lot of people were like, I'm never going to take a plea deal. I didn't do anything wrong. But a lot of people, after a year and a half, 2 years, they're like, yeah, I got to get back to my family. And so they're going to do time. But theoretically, if they bend the knee and they say, you know, I'm sorry or whatever, they might get less time than if they go to trial with a you know, as you indicated, you know, a biased DC jury. You know, they're going to get punished when they're sentenced if they go to trial. You know, if you take a plea deal, you get a 3-point reduction. You get a good boy bonus. And then if you go to trial and you try to defend yourself, they consider you a liar. Even though it's your constitutional right to defend yourself, if you go to trial, they consider you a liar. You get a 3-point enhancement. So you get a trial tax. And so the discrepancy between just sucking it up, you know, and versus, you know, standing up for yourself, it actually can be an exorbitant increase, a huge discrepancy. It's not justice. And again, this is why, just like, I'm not saying I want an inquisition against the left or any of the people I despise who spent like the past decade burning the country to the ground. But you look at the discrepancy between how Trump supporters have been treated versus, again, it's not just Antifa or BLM. You have environmental protesters who are causing a racket in DC. You have Code Pink who interrupted the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. Is that not a proceeding of Congress? So even Biden's kid who was causing a ruckus. Remember, Joe Biden's son was in Congress, you know, causing problems there, showing up,
interrupting the procedure for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so that's like it's kind of self-evident that this is all theatrics. The problem is when they do theatrics, they just look like D-bags. But when the theatrics is on our side, we spend years in prison. So there's a human toll here that's really it's unacceptable. And you know, even for people, I'll say this too. This is uncomfortable. This is something people don't want to address. Even when people did things they should not have done, and a lot of people did, they still deserve due process. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to justify violence at the Capitol on January 6th, but let me just say this. is spraying an officer of the law worth 10 years of your life? I've never heard of that. You know, using pepper spray, even on an officer of the law, which is not okay, does not mean that someone should do that kind of time. That's insane. You know, that is absolutely insane. You got, and not for nothing, it's been indicated already, you have people who had nonviolent charges who've been convicted for over a decade. Kelly Meggs, who we just mentioned, it was the head of the Oath Keepers of Florida. He got 12 years. He helped save cops' lives. The Oath Keepers, when they were in the Capitol, actually were helping the cops do their job, because that officer who lied in front of Congress, Officer Dunn, who's, I think, Harry Dunn, I think he's running for office in Maryland or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
He perjured himself under oath. He got, you know, my friends are serving over a decade in prison because people like that lied about them. Yeah. You can see the Oath Keepers. I just want to say this too. Kelly Meggs, you can see there was someone who he thought he was having a medical issue and he collapses on the ground. It turns out he was just doing some kind of weird prayer or whatever, but he rushes over. That's the kind of stuff on the CCTV they don't show you, because they don't want you to see that these were a lot of these people. Yeah, there were provocateurs, but a lot of people were just there like tourists. When I'm in the Capitol, you can see me just wandering around. You know, 12 years. Even if you believe half the stupid crap they've said about the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, nobody deserves 12 years for anything that happened on January 6th. And then you look at Enrique Tarrio. Again, I'm not going to defend everything the Proud Boys did that day, but the dude wasn't even in Washington, D.C. How the hell did he get 20 years?
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Well, there's that guilt by association. They're trying to, it's almost like a RICO thing where everybody conspired. Like you said, they were asking, what's the plan? What's the plan? We've heard that, just so you know, not only have they asked you, you know, multiple people who've been a part of January 6th, but they've asked that of people who've been involved in investigating their own local elections. What's the plan? Who arranged this plan? We're like, we look at them, what is wrong with you? How do you not understand that there is still a majority of this population who believes that this country belongs to us, to we the people, and it's our responsibility to make sure that it is around for the next generation. We have the obligation, we have the duty to protect and defend our country, especially our own backyard. And that means for us, it was securing our elections. And they've asked that same, they've carried that same type of lawfare, that same kind of militant attitude and tyrannical attitude that the government knows best, and you're just an idiot and you have no right to speak or be here or talk about anything that we haven't given you permission to. But we're going to be bringing Jerry Perno in just a moment here. But Tim, I really want to ask you just this. There's so much more to talk with you about. We're going to keep this going from beyond today. This is just our start. This is my baptism into January 6th stuff for real. The really hard stuff. And so, in just kind of for people who are watching right now, who are still saying, well, you shouldn't have been there, or you shouldn't have, I've heard it. I've heard everything. They've said it to me as well. Well, you shouldn't have done that. Well, you shouldn't have been so like this. You shouldn't have, you know, what do you have to say to those people? Just in conclusion.
Okay. It's not an argument. It's not an argument, you know, and that like, I for the sake of argument, right? For the sake of argument, because I love debate, you know, for the sake of argument, let me grant that I shouldn't have been there means what? I get 4 years. I get a 4-year sentence for trespassing, essentially. Right. You know, I mean, you have old ladies, you know, that they're forcing to give apologies during their allocutions in court because they wandered into the Capitol building. You know, and it's like people really have the wrong idea too. The vast majority of what went on inside the Capitol building is actually even, again, on the outside, I've already discussed this, like most of what was going on the outside of the Capitol building on the grounds was also peaceful. They just want to focus on the few of like the areas where there was a police perimeter, where you had agitators or you had the crowd reacting. But even inside the Capitol building was way better than that even. The vast majority of people, and Tucker Carlson, I think, has shown a little bit of this video, but even that doesn't do justice to the fact that the vast majority of people inside the Capitol building, the people who made it inside, and there were a lot, didn't even do anything. You had, again, I can actually think, I can count on my hand like the amount of people who actually like tried to fight the cops in the building. And the ones I know by name were informants. And so I'm just thinking, like, you watch the video, the people are walking through velvet ropes like it's a tour. I even say that on the recording too. I'm like, when we got inside the building, it was like a tour. You know, all these statues and stuff like that. I mean, it's maybe it's inappropriate, but it's kind of funny. Like, I'm in the crypt. You have all these statues, these amazing statues, these relics of history, and somebody puts a Trump flag inside one of the statue's hands, and I'm like, you know what? That's funny. And so there's video of me. I go up to it and I'm pointing at it. I'm like, that's kind of funny, and it was. And even if I shouldn't have been in the Capitol building, and I'm not saying I should have been, it's not worth half a decade of someone's life. It's totally inappropriate. And again, I'm not so indignant that I don't understand that the functions of government exist for a reason, and that there does need to be an orderly state of society. So I'm not just going to say, whose house, our house, I have a right to be there. But on some level, it is true. So even if I didn't have a permit, the average person just walking into the Capitol building, it's not the end of the world. It's actually, it's on some level, it's like, isn't that why we have a government? Isn't that what a republic is? Isn't that what a democracy is? A reflection of the popular will? I'm not defending mob rule or mob violence, but most of those people who were in that building were not fighting cops. They weren't breaking things, and they weren't stealing stuff. They were taking selfies. They were actually fist bumping cops. They were hugging cops, and they were singing. And I'm sorry, like, that's just not an insurrection. It's not even a riot at that point. Once you got past a certain point, it was kind of kumbaya. And they want you to think everybody that was in there was like, ooh, telling people to hang Mike Pence or something like that. And that's just not true. It's absolutely not true. And that's why there are all these thousands of hours of video that they withheld. And I mean, the CCTV kind of really does show you there were a lot of hijinks going on. But it wasn't the regular Trump supporters who were usually doing that kind of stuff. I don't think it was Trump supporters. I don't think it was Trump supporters who, put zip ties on certain doors to control the flow of police traffic at certain times and stuff like that. I could be wrong, but it just, I think Occam's razor will vindicate the people who were at the Capitol on January 6th for the right reason. I think most people who were there for the right reason were there for the right reason. And I think a lot of people who were not will be exposed as something other than upstanding citizens.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you for being with us and for starting to tell your story. 3 years of paying a fine that really it was not yours to pay. So thank you. Thank you for coming out and sharing with us today. And there's a lot more here. We've only begun to scratch the surface of your story. So I'm looking forward to telling more, because you're right. This is also the year of exposure. And there's a lot of people that need to be exposed.
The story, it's not just my story, though. And I appreciate it. I appreciate this. There are a lot of other stories we need to get to, too. So I hope that all the men that are still rotting behind bars, that we can talk about them in the future as well, because they deserve advocates. Thank you.
Absolutely, Tim. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. Cynthia, all right. I mean, he's right. There's so many more stories. Remember, they have a 3,500 people they're going to go after. And I think so far they're at 1,400.
Around 1,400.
So
their quota is 2,000 by the election. That's their quota.
That's for this year.
Yeah.
For 2024, they want 2,000 more people incarcerated. Okay. Well, You know what? Here's the one of the worst stories that has come out about this. When the federal government that has unlimited resources and is able to weaponize every single one of their 3-letter unnecessary agencies against you, as Tim was talking about, I think of all the agencies he named that we now know were a part of that day of providing some type of support to create the illusion of an insurrection. And you're a young man trying to figure out what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to not, be a burden to your family and a burden to society, and feeling the shame of the government targeting you as a terrorist. The very worst possible thing can happen. And Jerry Perna is with us. I had the awesome privilege of meeting you, Jerry, at the premiere at Mar-a-Lago for Police State, which was so fitting. But I don't want to meet you, because your story, this shouldn't be how we should know each other at all.
No.
Do you want to just talk a little bit? Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me on, Sharna, and thank you, Cynthia, for your support. It's just been unreal over the last 2 years. I don't know if I could have gotten through it without her. Many people know the story about my nephew, Matt. He went into the Capitol, just like many other people did, armed with a cell phone, no weapons, didn't break anything, hurt anybody, or steal anything. He even nodded approval to several Capitol Police officers that recent videotape has revealed Matt walking through, just as he said he did, calmly, smiling, and just thinking he was part of a historic day. And of course, it ruined it. It ruined his life that day. What followed was 13 months of mental torture, to where he eventually pled guilty to the felony of obstruction of an official proceeding, which, as Tim spoke about, we're now finding that could be overturned, and if the Supreme Court does what they're supposed to do. And Matt killed himself because he was facing what he thought was 6 to 12 months in jail. And in the last hour, they decided they were going to add a sentencing enhancement that could have taken him upwards of 9 years in prison. This was a 37-year-old man that never had a parking ticket. He never had a crime. He had never committed a crime, had never been in trouble for anything ever in his life. He was he was a businessman. He was successful. He had a huge following on social media. He was kind-hearted, and he was just a very loving person. But the thought of facing all these years in prison was too much for him, and he hanged himself in his garage. And our family has never recovered. We will never recover. I speak out on behalf of my family because my family is not able to do this. They are too brokenhearted. Our family gatherings are never going to be the same. And, I'm not discounting that other people commit suicide for various reasons. And it's tragic. It is tragic. It is just probably the hardest death to take in a family, especially for a parent like my brother. But to know that he killed himself because the country he loved was out to put him in prison for exercising what we thought was our freedom of speech, it made it 100 times worse. My flag is flying on my flagpole in the back, and it is in shreds now. I will not change it. I will not put a new one out there because we are a country in distress. I'm not proud of this country anymore. I hope someday to be proud of it, but at this point, I'm not. What they did to him, what they've done to our family, the DOJ, the corrupt FBI, it's just despicable. And I speak out on behalf of my nephew because I really wouldn't wish this nightmare on anybody, even my worst of enemies. I would not wish this.
For those who are just joining us, Jerry Perna is the aunt of Matthew Perna and one of the J6 targeted. And we are using this time to talk about these stories and talk about these great patriots and how they were targeted by the DOJ, targeted by Merrick Garland and the Biden regime. And Jerry, this has been something I really didn't want to talk about, and it's been, but I know it's what we need to talk about: the weaponization of the government, the despair that follows. It is a hopeless feeling to have the government at your back coming after you and trying to take everything from you. When Matthew, in the days before this, what was his state of mind? Had you talked with him? How was he handling what the judge was potentially laying down for him?
He wasn't handling it well at all. He called me on that Monday, sobbing on the phone, just uncontrollably sobbing. I could barely understand him. And he had developed a stutter in recent weeks. That Matt was a very articulate speaker. I mean, he did many podcasts and educational things on holistic products that he sold and that he believed in. And to hear him stuttering on the phone and crying to the point where I couldn't console him. And of course, hindsight is 2020, and I kick myself every day. I wish I
Jerry. No.
something. No, I will never not regret booking a plane ticket. I had booked 8 plane tickets that year that I went home to try to console him throughout this mess. I went to attorney's appointments with him. I was there for him during the worst times, but I wasn't there for him at that last moment when he needed me. I will always regret not flying home that week, because I don't know that I could have changed his mind. I don't know if the moment I left, he would have killed himself. I don't know. But knowing what I know now, I would have done anything within my power to keep this from happening. And now that you're looking at this obstruction charge possibly being overturned, I am really, really hoping it is, for the sake of the J6ers who faced that charge, because this charge is giving them the longest prison sentences. But there is this part of me that is incredibly angry about this, that it took them this long to finally look at this charge and determine whether or not it was unlawfully used. Mm-hmm. And we have met not only Matt, but 3 others that killed themselves. Unnecessary deaths. That if our Republicans in Congress had taken this seriously, if they had not swept this under the rug and treated it like the elephant in the room, these people would all be alive. You know, I got to give the Democrats credit where credit's due. They lie, cheat, and steal, but boy, do they get things accomplished, don't they? They do. Our Republicans are soft. They are soft, and they come off as being uncaring. And I really don't have a whole lot of respect for many of them, except for Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been a source of support to me and my family from the beginning. And she is the only one that co-sponsored the Matthew Lawrence Perna Act of 2022 that Louis Gohmert submitted before he left Congress. And then she reintroduced it a couple of weeks ago, and Cynthia and I were there for it. And Cynthia can tell you, that morning, Marjorie was fuming mad, fuming, because not one Republican co-sponsored the bill with her. And I was off the rails that day. Cynthia is my witness. I was not in a good way that day when she told me that none of them would co-sponsor the bill with her. And one of the most important components of that bill would allow for a change of venue. If the J6ers had been given a chance to have their cases heard outside of DC, they would not have been pleading guilty. And that is exactly the motive for them not getting a change of venue, because they want their trials heard in DC so they can all be found guilty, so they can all get the maximum sentences. Or they just simply plead guilty because they know they're not going to get a fair trial.
So here's the thing, so Jerry, this bill is sitting there. No one has signed on to it yet. When are they, will there be a vote on it, or what is going to happen with this bill? Or is it going to kill committee?
Honestly, I don't know where this is going to go. She definitely needs support in order for this bill to even make it to the table. But for not even one congressperson to co-sponsor with her, what does that say?
They don't care.
They don't. And I have to begin to wonder, I really do wonder why they are so insistent upon ignoring January 6th. Are they involved too? Is there videotape showing them doing something they shouldn't have been doing? I'm beginning to wonder.
I couldn't explain it. I mean, when I see great patriots like Mike Lindell surrendering, giving up everything they have, all the wealth they have in the world, they've been canceled, President Trump. I mean, I see these great people who the rest of the country is following after. All the regular people are following after, and they're calling out elections. They're calling out January 6th. Let My People Go is a film that Mike Lindell just sponsored on behalf of Professor Clements, telling the story of January 6th. And Professor Clements has been so vocal and supporting and working with people who have come out of or are still in there. I don't know. I just think it's self-preservation. I think that McCarthy wanted nothing to do with it. My understanding is he's still headhunting. He's still removing people. I mean, right now you nailed it, Jerry. And let's just talk about these people in Congress. Ken Buck of Colorado, who preemptively is leaving Congress, leaving a vacancy there that will ensure that some idiot rhino will step right into his place. And as much as I've not been a fan, and still I'm not, of Lauren Boebert, I understand there was at least one conversation in support of January 6ers, but there's been nothing that is tangible for sure. But Ken Buck said, hey, don't worry about me leaving. Worry about the next 3 that are going to leave right behind me. The Republican Party is sabotaging our country out of their hate and disdain for President Trump. And that's why there's no justice for January 6th. They hate President Trump more than they love this country.
Exactly. And why all of a sudden are they dropping? Why? Who's paying them? Somebody's paying somebody.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if this is bribery, blackmail, or yeah, they've got a lump sum waiting for them. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, and you know what? And I think, honestly, the DC judges who are overseeing these cases should be investigated. Why aren't 100%. The Republicans forming a committee like the Democrats did, the J6 sham committee that they had? But they had one. And it got full coverage on C-SPAN every day that it was taking place. Yeah. How come we're not allowed to have one? We've had the power in the House now for 2 years now. And what have we done with it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
And now we're going to lose it. And I'm saying to myself, lose it. We never really had it because we didn't utilize it. So why even bother?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It definitely, the situation you're going through, at least 3 other families are going through related to January 6th, and how many other people are on the edge right now as we're seeing these men. Cynthia, you shared with us about the man who was just picked up this last week from Illinois. He's got a new baby on the way. I mean, there's such a despair that people are going to experience because you're up against an all-powerful government and there seems to be no allies, as you're pointing out, Jerry. The people that we have, quote, elected to represent us and stand in the gap for us and actually fulfill their rightful duties in government aren't doing it. They're not doing it. And I don't know. I don't know what to do. I know more and more people, I think I lump myself kind of in that category because I didn't really want to touch this topic too much. We did a couple interviews with some family, with some fathers, but I don't know. It seemed like such a ginormous elephant. But what you guys have proven, Jerry, what you've been doing and continuing to talk about, Matthew and Cynthia, in your organization, as you're standing up and helping to provide, I know you guys work together a lot also and support these families, is you're kind of taking it down to a bite that we can enter into this. I can enter into the injustice of a government that has unlimited power and is wielding it against the American people. And I can enter into, I think many people can on here as I'm looking at the chat too. Many people understand the things we haven't thought about before. All the families left behind, all the fallout that's happening from the government being weaponized. It's so close to home now. And I don't think it's ever been this close to home. We've always been able to justify it and say, they did something wrong. They were criminals. They did, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't. But now, what can you say about showing up at the Capitol? What can you say about questioning elections? What can you say about standing outside an abortion clinic, and committing no violence
Sharona,
or no, yeah.
If I could say this,
Please.
I want to touch on 3 quick things. One, it always amazes me that Jerry sits here and shows up when she doesn't have to. And she stays in support of all the work that we're doing. She has seen it hands-on. She has met with several of these families. She has seen the children, and she knows that we're getting the work done through Patriot Freedom Project. And I just adore her. And I love you, and I love my man, Vic. Thank you, Jer. But I'll tell you, in the beginning of this, I met with a family. I'm not going to say their name. I met with a family. It was a wife and her couple of children. And they were in my home, came to my home, and one of the children was young. 5 years old, I think. And we were coloring. I had gotten him some coloring books and we were coloring. And he said to me that his dad was a bad guy. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, the police came and they kicked the door. My mommy was crying. These children are going to, they're going to be scarred. They're going to always be reminded. There's always going to be this Band-Aid, if you will, right? And that's just one of many, many, many stories. There's a woman who's, doesn't have any children, but her boyfriend, went to prison. He's still in prison. He hasn't even been sentenced yet. And, her home was violently raided. I mean, big time. I mean, she was taken out of her house in her pajamas, at gunpoint. I mean, guns drawn on her face, on her head. She couldn't sleep in her bed for 1 full year after her boyfriend was taken into custody. And, there's just so many stories like that. And you think about these people who, they fall into, despair. Like I said earlier, Tim is very, very strong. He really is. Tim has been surviving battles and fighting battles that I don't even need to get into here, but his whole life. I don't worry about him coming through this. Not now. I might have going back, if the imprisonment had continued, I think that is worrisome for a lot of people. When Rachel Powell called me 2 weeks ago, she called to advise me that there was something going on in the prison, and I want to be careful, to talk about it and say it. And so I'm just, not going to go there right now because I want to be considerate of some other J6ers. But something's going on in her prison. And she was just, she called me and she said, get me out of here. Get me out of here.
We are going to be addressing that, by the way. We are going to be addressing that this is part of the, without saying, I guess we're not going to say the full details of it, but these idiots running this country are doing everything from the bottom of the barrel to distort and destroy any kind of normalcy, any kind of safety, any kind of protection for women, period. For at all. So just, understanding that much, the women that are being sentenced, I shared earlier, these people are being sent, these men, these regular everyday men, never been in trouble, never don't have a criminal history at all. They're just solid guys. They're being sent to maximum security prisons where the worst of the worst are sent. And so are these women. This is not in line with the judgment is not in line with the supposed crime. It's absolutely outrageous. And you're going to have extremely wounded and damaged people coming out of these facilities. And I think one of the things I wanted to stress too, and, Jerry, your situation, I'm not even qualified to speak to it. And I really maybe that's why I've also kind of stayed away from this, because it's just, what can I possibly, this is an anguish that is just too deep. When your own government has betrayed you to the absolute core, and there's nobody to stand up for you. There's no way to get it back. There's no way to have any justice. What can you do? That is a paralyzing feeling. And I really just try to stay away from that idea, or even that thought that there's nothing I can't do about whatever issue I'm dealing with. And I know many Americans feel that way. That's why this is so hard. That's why people have cognitive dissonance about this government betraying its own citizens, selling us out to the CCP and to communism right now. They are doing it to us as we speak. And there's no more obvious indicator than going after the top of our country, the most patriotic, the people who run businesses, develop things, understand how important and significant America is, and taking them and dismantling them, throwing them in dungeons for years and ruining their families. They know what they're doing. And
Sharona, in our docuseries, Jerry, there's, I'm gonna send this clip to you. I should have sent it to you today. I'm gonna send it to you, and you could show it at another time.
If you email it to me now, I can play it.
Okay. There's a young girl whose dad, is in prison, and we filmed them for our docuseries, part 1. And her mom is, talking about her daddy-daughter dance that she had to go to without her daddy, and how they had to borrow another daddy for her. And you look at this little girl, right, Jar? You look at this little girl and you just see, there's one thing when you cry, but then there's another cry, it comes from the depth of your soul. And you look at this little girl, she's, 9, I think, and you just see the pain and how much She misses her old life. And it's just devastating. It's so devastating. And then you see another wife who's talking about how her husband has been, in the military most of their marriage and has gone on deployments. And she says, but this is not a deployment. This is harder than a deployment. And again, nobody is thinking about this part of it. This is Tim didn't just come home and say, okay, let me just pick up and move on now and pick up where I left off. You have to figure out what that is. And how do you do it when your very government has stripped you of everything, has taken everything from you? We need, Sharona, it's not easy to ask for money. It's just not.
We
I would
we
love to
owe
see.
this.
Well,
Yeah, we owe this to
we
these
do.
families.
We do. And I would love to see somebody send me a check for $50,000 right now. I know it's a big
Absolutely.
ask. I know it's a big ask, but I could tell you it could pay for several people with their legal fees. It could pay somebody's rent. It could help us prepare and get a bunch of gift cards to give out to these moms when the end of the summer comes and back to school is starting all over. We need support. We need the support.
And I want to just implore people who are watching right now, I want to send you over to patriotfreedomproject.com. There's many ways to contribute to this organization. We're going to be sharing the stories of the families that have been helped throughout the next couple weeks and months. And there's a big event that's coming up on June 1st because, I could not speak to someone who would find themselves in that despair. But one thing I can think right off the bat was to feel that you're alone, that there's not going to be anybody there that can possibly support what's happening to you. And I don't want that to happen anymore. I don't want to see any family. I've seen these children. I've gotten to meet some of the families now. I've gotten to look at and talk with the moms and the wives and the children. And I've seen them now. Some of the men who had just gotten out of prison, including Tim, and see this is outrageous. This cannot happen. But the worst thing that could happen is if we, the people, if we forget about them, if we stop investing in them, if we're not here supporting them in whatever way that we can, then we're just as guilty. Because no matter what, at this point right now, everyone who's not been completely molested by the government the way these families have and had everything taken from them, we are far better off. And it is our duty to start funding what's happening, whether, for everyone knows I work in elections. I work with Mike Lindell, the Lindell Offense Fund, because I believe at the root of all of this, why we have all these psychopaths in Congress right now who won't stand up for us. They won't do the right thing. Marjorie Taylor Greene, one out of how many? That's it. That's what we've got out of hundreds. You've got to be kidding me. That's what we have. And she's wonderful. But I'm saying one person, one woman out there trying to fight this fight. So when we look at this and we've got these families, we know this is a problem. It's going to continue to be a problem as they fulfill their 2,000 person quota for the 2024 year. Yes, guys, the FBI has a 2,000 person quota that they're going to go after 2,000 more people this year from January 6th. How many families are going to be affected there? And so we want to send everybody to the Patriot Freedom Project. But you have to understand, guys, these things cost money. And I don't want you just to make if you write a $50,000 check right now, then I'll let you off the hook for the rest of the year. Other than that, you have to make a monthly contribution. We need to stay committed and we need to stay diligent. You all know I haven't talked about this. You know that I haven't asked for anything in this sphere at all. But I'm asking everybody to put their money where their mouth is, share this out, send it to the people in your family that have wealth, that have the even more ability, but we all have ability. You remember Jesus said, don't chide the woman who only had 2 mites. She's giving what she can give. That is what we need to do right now. We all have something to give right now. We all have something to offer. And I want you to figure out what that is. If it is connections that you need to bring to Patriot Freedom Project, fine. If it's money and funding, we need that desperately. The great thing too with your organization is the quality of people you have working with you, of course. President Donald Trump, it is the only J6 organization that is endorsed by President Trump. And that means something to me because we hear a lot of things. We're not going to talk about it today, but we hear a lot of things about people raising money and all kind of things that we don't know what happens. But one thing that Anthony Vo let us in on last week. So Anthony Vo has been targeted by the FBI. He's waiting for his trial right now. And his mother was just picked up last week, right? Well, he told us on our interview that those Give, Send, Go accounts that people are raising money on, these J6 organizations that are raising money there, not yours, people who are incarcerated right now, they're actual January 6ers. That money is added to the back of the fines. Once their trial is finished, they add the known amount of money in that Gifts and Go account, and they tack it on to the fines. So they never even get the benefit of that money. That's horrifying. And I don't know if people don't know this. I didn't know it until Anthony told us. But I don't want that to happen. So I'm telling you, this is a legitimate organization. This is where our money, where our resources need to go to support attorneys' fees for the January 6ers and good counsel, guys, not crooked counsel, good, tested, battle-weary counsel that knows now what they're doing. They have that history now with the judges in DC and knowing what works and what doesn't and how to navigate these people through the system. That is extremely meaningful. We didn't even get there today. But I want everybody to just really own this. These are our people. These are our people that would have had our backs, and we need to have their backs now. I want to see that money coming in. I want to see if you're already going there right now. I want you to comment in the section that you've gone. Who's going to start us out today? I'm sure there's already been donations made, but I want to see a $300 donation in that box in just a few moments here, saying that you went and you made a $300 contribution. I want you to head that way now and start giving. This is where we need to be. We need to protect our families. We don't need government to do it. You and we are going to do this. Cynthia, you answered the call. You did what you were supposed to do. Jerry, you answered the call, and you more than did what you were supposed to do. And now you're doing even more than even could possibly be asked of you.
Sacrificed more than any of us combined. And, Sharona, there's a lot of lawyers in this that got involved in this for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
We were working with 35, 40 lawyers at one time, and that is not the case now. You have to have thick skin, and you cannot be afraid to hurt somebody's feelings doing this work. And Jerry gets on my back sometimes because I do struggle with that, because I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to walk away from somebody and they're feeling, badly because of me. But this has not been easy work. I have been attacked horribly. My family, it's been very, very rough. And I'm talking within the J6 community. There's no room for that. And we don't have time for it. I stay in my lane and I stay focused. I have the support of many. I have great board members. The great Ed Martin is our board member. He's amazing.
Yes. Incredible. I just want to acknowledge to the public who are watching right now, who may think they know a thing or two about the J6, like the insider stuff that we're not talking about today. I actually have the receipts of all of those who were incarcerated with Tim Hale who support you. Every single one of them signed up on this supporting you, Cynthia. And I have those receipts in my hand. So I have just the absolute most confidence in what you have done and your team has done and the people that you have helped. I've met them. I've seen them. I've witnessed it firsthand. I had to go and feel. I am Thomas. Okay. I had to go put my hand in the side and I had to see the wounds. It's what I had to do to be properly motivated to get in this particular fight. So we do have one more guest that I wanted to bring in with all of us. I think that she'll need that support. Is she ready? Can we bring her in? Dova Weingart?
I think she's not going to talk. She texted.
Okay.
She said that her attorney advised her it'd be best if she didn't.
That's perfectly fine. Do one of you want to share her story for her on her behalf?
Cynthia would be. She said Cynthia knows her story, and
wonderful. Let's do it.
You can definitely share it.
Yeah.
Dova is getting ready to go to her trial. Her trial is coming up in June. Maybe it's July. I'm pretty sure it's June. This is a business owner. This is a wife. This is a mother. Okay. She's very vocal about, how she feels about what's been done to her. She's had to change lawyers a few times. She's put money out of her own pocket. I have tried to help her. I have tried to, financially help her with her legal fees. She refuses to take it. She will not take any funds because she wants people that are in more need than her to take, to be able to have that financial support. It's funny. I love to tell little stories like this, Sharona. In the beginning, before I got to, really know Dova, she was not.
Are you there? Did we lose you? I think we lost her.
I think so.
Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of stories online, actually. I think it's amazing when Rolling Stone actually took the time to start talking about these stories. It's so bizarre to me, isn't it? Of all the things.
Of all the,
I mean, of all the things and all the news organizations, this is a bakery owner turned. Look at the headlines. All you have to do, when I was starting in politics, one of the first things they start teaching about is media manipulation. And look at the very first headline: a bakery owner turned pole wielding January 6th rioter. I mean, this is what we're up against. Even the Rolling Stone is a part of the MSM, and this is the kind of nonsense that they post up. It's bizarre. I don't know a lot about Dova's story, but I do know that things like that are not helpful. And that's what they've done. As we've talked about, the way that the perspective, what they're putting on people, how they're trying to make them appear to the public as maniacs. This was a responsible business owner, family woman who came to January 6th, just like so many of us did. And now being targeted by mainstream media to be crazy, to be pole wielding. I mean, it's just insane. So I don't know a lot about her story, but
it's exactly what they want everybody to think. It's, it's the court of public opinion, and they're going to find you guilty before you've even gone to court. And Matt was facing this, unfortunately, with social media being as powerful as it is in a small town. I mean, they crucified him. It was horrible. He didn't leave his home. He stopped going out. He stopped running. He was a runner. He loved to run. He stopped competing in races. He stayed in his house. He gave his television away because he didn't want to watch his picture on the nightly news anymore. It was horrible. And I hope they pay someday. I hope they do, but I honestly don't have any faith that they will. Not on this earth. For what they've done. I mean, they're going to answer to God someday, even though I don't think many of them believe in God anyway. They're going to answer to him for what they did to these people and continue to do. And let's face it, they just wanted to instill fear in the American public. Don't speak out. Sit down and do as you're told and keep your mouth shut. And that's exactly what I believe January 6th was about. Control. And, you mentioned police state before, and the tagline for police state was, "Are we living in a police state?" Yeah, we are. And if you don't think we are, you need to open your eyes, because you can find yourself in the same shoes as these January 6ers for doing nothing.
Absolutely, Jerry, the ruling yesterday is really significant, and people need to take a minute and go and read through the ruling, read through the decisions of the Supreme Court justices. It was the First Amendment trial, basically on big tech versus government. Does the government have the right to infiltrate big tech and tell them what they can and can't do, to manipulate accounts, to put pressure on them, to go after certain accounts and certain, to manipulate what's put out to the public? Do they have the right to do that? And these judges are making the case that that government has more authority than the citizen.
Yes. Yeah. Land of the free. Remember that? No.
It's terrifying in light of what you're saying. And this is what people really need to understand, Jerry. What you just said. Any one of us can become the next target based on whatever, they're going for, whatever image they're trying to shut down, whatever narrative they're trying to shut down. Any one of us, from a doctor, you've seen this happen, to a lawyer, to a mother, to a, patriotic business owner. It's happening to everybody. And that's how we know, if the government was afraid of us, we would have freedom. They're not afraid of us.
No, they're not afraid. And, people ask me if I'm afraid. Are you afraid speaking out? No, I really am not. You know what? Come after me. Take me down if you want. At this point, I don't care. It's not a country I'm really that proud of right now anyway. I don't expect that I won't get taken down at some point. They watch my website. They have tampered with my emails. So I know I'm being watched. I just don't care anymore. I don't. I'm going to go down fighting, but I'm not going to stand here and keep my mouth shut and stay in my house and be afraid to do anything. No, you're not going to do that to me. That's not living.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And Jerry, yeah, you are such an example to every single one of us not to not to let grief and despair stop. You know, it's exactly what you just said. I don't need to add anymore.
Thank you.
You're incredible. You are making Matthew very proud.
Thank you.
Very proud.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm so glad that we've all had the chance to finally connect and start this. This is extremely critical because if we don't get President Trump in, this is the beginning. You know, it won't be the end. It will be the beginning of much worse when they think when they have total consolidated power, no checks and balances. And nobody, even now, as you pointed out, we've had 2 years supposedly of owning the House, and they've done nothing. These representatives, quote, have done nothing for us. Nothing. So,
And they didn't do anything, Sharona, you know, when he was in office, when we had the Senate and the House,
right.
nothing got done. You know, you had Paul Ryan, you had people like Paul Ryan working against, you know, President Trump on a daily basis. So it's very, very disturbing. I'm sorry about my brand new phone overheated. It's burning hot right now. I apologize
Oh, no
for
worries at all.
leading the call. Sharona, this was an incredible, you know, informative discussion. You spent so much time. You're so gracious, and I really am very grateful, and I appreciate you very much.
Cynthia, this is what I have to give. This is what I know I can do, and I'm going to do more of it. And we're going to be loud and bold, and we're going to continue to be courageous till they shut us all down.
That's right.
I mean, and then you know what? Then we'll go to the street corners like the old prophets used to do. I mean, that's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure people know what's going on. More than anything, what I wanted to convey and really get out there to the public is look at these people that we've had on today. These are normal, everyday, reasonable, rational people. Matthew is a normal, everyday business owner, a runner. You know, Dova owns a bakery. Tim served our country with honor, and then led a union, worked in security, and was a security union leader. It doesn't matter. You're not safe. You're not going to find solace tucking yourself away and trying to hide from what's happening to our country right now. We are losing this country. Every moment that you stay silent and you do nothing, we're losing this country even more. All of us, there's something that we can do to help. And right now, today, our focus is to work with these families to continue to make sure they have provision, they have their needs met. We're not talking about lavish things. We're talking about basic necessities that these people do not have anymore because their breadwinners are gone. They are put in jail under false pretenses for a political agenda. And it's our turn to stand up. So I just, one last time, patriotfreedomproject.com. I want to see some big money rolling in there tonight, you guys. I want to see you guys writing checks. I want to see you making contributions, be a monthly contributor, and let's stand with these families. It's not going to get better. We already know that. It's going to get much, much worse over the next couple months. It is going to get much, much worse. Colorado especially is becoming extremely aggressive for anyone who was on the Capitol on the premises, period, on January 6th. So much so they just extradited a woman from Florida last week. They're crazy. They're insane. And they're not going to stop till they get what they want. But you know what? We're crazier about our freedom. And we're protected by the founding documents. And we intend to, like you said, Tim, earlier, we also, as a citizen of this country, have made an oath to that Constitution to defend it. And we need to do it. That's what we're going to do.
There's so much weaponization of government happening. I mean, since I've started Patriot Freedom Project, I have come in contact and I have met several people who have, been part of a failed judicial system. I introduced you to one of those young ladies at CPAC 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
The story of Mike McMahon. I mean, look at Daniel Penny. Look at Daniel Perry. Their list is long. We could go on and on and on of how many people are just being, really obliterated because the government doesn't like their politics. This is a big political game of theater, and it's really very dangerous.
Well, I appreciate you guys being with us. Jerry, anything that you would like to say to conclude our time together tonight? You certainly should and can.
I just want to add that, when Matthew was going through this, there weren't any support groups that he was aware of. Patriot Freedom Project had not yet really gotten off the ground. He wasn't able to talk to people who were standing in his shoes. If Patriot Freedom Project had been around during that time, I honestly believe Matt would still be here. And it would not have been because he needed financial assistance. Matt made a very good living. He did not need financial assistance. He needed emotional support from people who understood. I wish Patriot Freedom Project had been there. So when people are, thinking whether or not this is a good organization to donate to, let me just tell you that it's a very fine organization. And I wish it had been in existence when Matt needed them. And in order for people to have access to organizations like Patriot Freedom Project, they have to learn about them. So share their website. If you can't donate, share the website with everybody you know. And, some people think that, $5 is all I can give. If that's all you can give, if 100 people gave $5, that adds up. And I just want you to know that your money is going where it should go, to support these families, their children, their living expenses. It's much needed. And just take it from me. I believe in what they do. And I really, really wish they had been around when Matt needed them.
Thank you, Jer.
You guys, this has been wonderful tonight. Thank you for, again, trusting me to have you guys here with me and break us into this much needed conversation. We'll see if we all still have platforms tomorrow, but for now, thank you, Jesus, that we had this wonderful 2 hours to spend together going over these extremely important stories. I really want to encourage everybody also, please make sure that, of course, go to patriotfreedomproject.com, click donate, and get started being a contributor there to support these families that are absolutely in need and need us to be there for them. They need to see we give a freaking care. We do care. We are here. We don't need government to care for us and fend for us. We need to protect and care for one another. And then also Tim Hale on Twitter. I want to encourage everybody to go over and check it out. Never before seen footage. This has been his private footage from that day on January 6th. And, it is quite a story that contradicts everything that Miss Piggy and her J6 committee tried to say about the people of this great country and what we would actually be willing to do to our own capital and our own people and our own law enforcement. It contradicts everything they tried to accuse these great patriots of. So I encourage you guys, please head over there, share this out everywhere. Just start making this a part of your life, because it could be you. And more than likely, one day, it will be you if you're unwilling to acquiesce to a tyrannical government. Thank you so much, everybody. Cynthia and Jerry, thank you so much for being with us.
Can we just say one more thing? We encourage everybody to write to their local Congress, to their senators, and tell them they need to pass the Matthew Lawrence Perna Act. And you can go to Remembering Matt Perna, and you can find all the ways you could support them as well. And you can find all the ways how to help get this bill passed.
Awesome. And we're going to post that up also. Okay. We'll put that everywhere. Thank you so much for that. And Jerry, actually, we'll have you back on independently, and let's walk through. We've been talking about that for some time, but you're just filled with experiences and stories and a warning for the American people that they really need to hear multiple times. I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
God, I probably would have crawled into a hole and never came out, Jerry.
I felt
Thank
like
you.
She's a fighter. She is a spitfire. Let me tell you, her heart is amazing.
Thank you.
Well, thank God for the mothers, huh? And the aunties. Love you guys. Thank you so much.
Bye, Sharona. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being with us tonight. This was a very special edition of America's Mom. We are starting the January 6th conversation. What do we have left if we can't stand up for each other, if we can't talk about the critical things that have happened in our country to destroy our liberty? What do we have when we can't call out our Congress, who is systematically passing laws to shut down our ability to even say we have a problem with our government? When they don't stand up for those, for the least among us, they're certainly not going to stand up for you. We better start calling it out. Thank you guys for being with us. I want to remind you that all that's necessary for evil to continue to prevail in this country and everywhere else is for good men and women like you to do absolutely nothing. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and God bless you all.